The neighborhood bar smelled of roasted garlic and old pine, a steady hum of local chatter filling the low-lit space. But my focus wasn't on the noise. It was on the community notice board pinned to the exposed brick wall near the entrance. Every flyer, business card, and lost dog poster was perfectly aligned, forming a neat grid of neighborhood commerce. Except for one. 7 p.m. is when I usually solve payroll fires for my minor league baseball team, or negotiate away game travel logistics while keeping an eye on my 7-year-old daughter. Tonight, however, someone had pinned a neon pink citation over a beautifully lettered advertisement for Daphne's Delights like a threat. The staple had been driven in so hard it tore the thick cardstock of the bakery flyer, practically piercing the wall behind it. I took a slow sip of my club soda, the ice clinking against the glass, and studied the pink slip from my booth. It was an official homeowners association code violation. Maya kicked her feet under the table, her sneakers thumping a quiet, erratic rhythm against the wooden base of the booth. She was meticulously organizing her French fries by length, a habit she'd picked up from watching me sort player analytics on my tablet during breakfast. I checked my watch again. I was just trying to buy an hour of peace before the week's chaos began. A rare moment of stillness in a life built on constant motion. That peace evaporated the moment the heavy oak door of the bar swung open. Daphne Moore walked in. She was 38, 7 years my senior, and carried the kind of quiet, resilient grace that made a room shift when she entered. Tonight, though, she looked exhausted. There was a smudge of white flour near the collar of her denim jacket, and her shoulders carried a rigid tension that I recognized all too well. It was the posture of someone who had been playing defense for entirely too long without a substitute. She offered a tight, polite smile to the bartender cleaning glasses near the taps, but her gaze went straight to the notice board. I watched her step slow. I watched her hand reach out, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the torn edge of her flyer beneath the neon pink citation. Well, if it isn't the neighborhood's favorite rule breaker. The voice cut through the low hum of the bar like a poorly tuned whistle. Sylvia Gray. The HOA president slid into the space beside Daphne, holding a glass of Chardonnay with a grip that looked entirely too tight. Sylvia was a woman who wielded her clipboard and community bylaws like a tactical weapon. For the past 3 months, she had made a sport out of dropping by my driveway whenever I was loading Maya into my truck, offering overly enthusiastic suggestions about my landscaping and heavy-handed hints about needing a strong man to help her with her gutters. I had deflected every single one with polite, immovable distance. I set my glass down. The condensation pooled on the varnished wood. "This is a residential zone, Daphne," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that completely failed to reach her eyes. "You can't operate a commercial bakery out of your kitchen. The delivery trucks, the flour dust in the communal alleys. It's a liability." The board had no choice but to issue a formal cease and desist, along with the daily fines starting tomorrow morning. Daphne didn't raise her voice, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the strap of her purse. "Sylvia, it's a home-based cottage license. I've had it for 2 years. The only truck that comes is the postal service, and they come to your house too." "Rules are rules," Sylvia said, adjusting her silk scarf with her free hand. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes catching mine across the dim room. She stood up a little straighter, offering me a wide, theatrical smile before turning back to Daphne. "And honestly, it's just not a good look for our community. We have standards to maintain." I slid out of the booth, tapping the table twice so Maya knew to stay put. The floorboards creaked under my boots as I crossed the room. I stopped directly beside Daphne, standing just close enough to block the draft from the front door, offering a solid barrier between her and the sudden hostility of the space. "Evening, Sylvia," I said, my voice low and even. I looked down at the pink slip. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Municipal Code states that cottage food operations are exempt from standard commercial zoning fines unless they exceed a specific decibel limit or hazard threshold. "Has the HOA deployed decibel meters this week?" Sylvia blinked, her smile faltering. "Max, I didn't see you there. This is an internal board matter." "It's on a public board," I pointed out smoothly, tapping the neon paper with my index finger, "which makes it community business. If you're going to issue a fine, you need to cite the specific state statute that overrides her existing county permit. Otherwise, this is just vandalism of her marketing material." I reached out, carefully prying the staple loose with my thumb, and handed the pink slip to Sylvia. "You dropped this." Sylvia's face flushed a dull, mottled red. She snatched the paper, her eyes darting between me and Daphne. The board will be reviewing her property access on Friday, she clipped out, her tone dropping its sweet facade entirely. Enjoy your evening, Max. She didn't look at Daphne as she turned and marched out of the bar, the bell above the door chiming sharply in her wake. Daphne exhaled a long, shaky breath that seemed to deflate her entire frame. She rubbed her left wrist, a nervous habit I had noticed the first time we met at the community mailbox months ago. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, staring at her ruined flyer. I know, I agreed. But my defensive line was always my strongest asset. Come sit down. Maya has successfully categorized every fry on her plate, and she needs a distraction before she starts analyzing the ketchup packets. Daphne hesitated, her independence warring with her sheer exhaustion. But the tension in her jaw softened when she looked past me and saw Maya waving a particularly long, golden fry in our direction. Just for a minute, Daphne murmured. We walked back to the booth. I ordered her a chamomile tea without asking, remembering from a brief conversation weeks ago that she avoided caffeine after noon because of her baking schedule. When the mug arrived, I pushed it across the table. The fine is $500 a week, Daphne said softly, wrapping both hands around the warm ceramic. She knows I can't pay that. I just bought 3 commercial mixers. My margins are practically non-existent until the holiday orders clear next month. She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, I said, leaning back against the vinyl seat. But she has a procedural one. She's going to use the bylaws to bury you in paperwork until you run out of time. Daphne closed her eyes. I know. I've tried reading the HOA charter. It's 300 pages of legal jargon. I bake bread. Max, I don't litigate zoning disputes. No, I said, my voice steady. You don't. But I manage 65 athlete contracts, union disputes, and stadium zoning permits for a living. I know how to read a playbook. I pulled my tablet from my leather messenger bag and set it on the table. Bring your permit file to my office tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. We're going to run a gap analysis on her claim. Daphne looked at the blank screen of the tablet, then up at me. Max, I can't afford to hire you. And I won't accept charity. I have to handle this. It's not charity, I said, keeping my tone strictly professional, though I noticed the dark circles under her eyes and felt a sudden, sharp instinct to pull the weight off her shoulders. My team needs a reliable catering vendor for the front office and the VIP boxes this season. We haven't signed anyone yet. Whether you sign with the team or not, your permit rights stand on their own. This is about stopping harassment. But if I'm going to audit your logistics to see if you can handle a stadium contract, it falls under my purview to ensure your zoning is ironclad. Bring your paperwork. She studied my face, searching for pity. She found none. I wouldn't insult her with it. Slowly, the fight drained out of her posture, replaced by a cautious relief. 9 a.m., she repeated softly. Don't be late, I replied, handing Maya a napkin to wipe the salt from her fingers, and bring a copy of your delivery schedule. I think your routing is inefficient. Daphne let out a sudden, startled laugh, the sound bright and unexpected in the dim bar. Are you always this blunt? Only when I know I can fix the problem, I said. The next morning, the air in the team's front office was thick with the smell of stale coffee and leather polish. My strategy room overlooked the empty baseball diamond, the morning sun catching the frost on the outfield grass. I stood by the massive dry erase tactical board that covered the entire west wall. Usually, it held batting averages, bullpen rotations, and injury reports. Today, I had erased the right half to make room for Daphne's business structure. She arrived at exactly 8:55 a.m., carrying a thick, battered accordion folder and a cardboard carrier holding 2 massive, perfectly glazed cinnamon rolls. She looked around the cavernous room, taking in the framed jerseys and the rows of heavy oak desks. This is intimidating, she admitted, setting the folder down on the dark mahogany conference table. It's just a locker room with better furniture, I said, pulling out a heavy, high-backed chair for her. I stepped back immediately to give her space. Let's see the damage. For the next 2 hours, the room was silent except for the rhythmic squeak of my dry erase marker and the rustle of heavy paper. I used my tablet to cross-reference her local permits against the county database, projecting the HOA bylaws onto the smart screen beside the whiteboard. I treated her crisis exactly the way I treated a failing defensive strategy. I broke it down to its raw mechanics. Here, I said, capping the blue marker with a sharp click. I tapped the screen. Article 7, subsection B. Sylvia is classifying your ingredient deliveries as industrial freight, but your manifests show you're using standard parcel carriers. Under the county definition, industrial freight requires a vehicle weight over 26,000 pounds. Your heaviest delivery is a standard FedEx van. She's deliberately miscategorizing your logistics to trigger the fine. Daphne sat forward, her eyes scanning the text on the glowing screen. So, I just show them that at the meeting? No, I said, pulling up a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. Because Sylvia isn't fighting on facts, she's fighting on attrition. If you argue the definition, she'll table the discussion for 30 days, and the fines will accrue while you wait. We have to remove the target completely. I turned the laptop toward her. You're overextending your supply line here. You're taking 4 separate deliveries a week for flour, sugar, packaging, and yeast. If we consolidate your vendor orders into a single bi-weekly drop-off at the team's loading dock, which is zoned commercial, my guys can securely hold it. You pick it up in your personal SUV. 0 deliveries to your house. 0 grounds for a freight violation. Daphne stared at the screen, then at me. Max, I can't ask you to do that. And consolidating orders? I don't have the cash flow to buy in bulk every 2 weeks. I leaned against the edge of the table, crossing my arms to keep my posture relaxed. Your current cash flow is bleeding out through piecemeal shipping costs. You're paying a premium for small batch delivery. I ran the numbers from the receipts in your folder. If you consolidate, you save 14% on freight alone. That covers the bulk upfront cost within 2 cycles. I kept my voice gentle, making sure my critique of her business model was rooted purely in math, not judgment. It's a structural flaw, Daphne. You're working harder, not smarter. Let me give you the stadium dock access. It costs me nothing. She looked down at her hands, her thumbs tracing the edge of a manila envelope. The silence stretched. The HVAC unit kicked on, humming quietly in the background. I knew what this was. This was the terrifying moment of relinquishing control. When you build something by yourself, every offer of help feels like a threat to your competence. I swallowed the urge to push the logic further. I stayed perfectly still, forcing myself to wait. I've done everything myself since my divorce, she said softly, not looking up from the envelope. For 10 years. If I drop a ball, I fix it. If I mess up a schedule, I stay awake for 2 days to correct it, relying on someone else's loading dock. Someone else's schedule. She shook her head slightly. I'm not asking you to give up the ball, I said quietly. I'm asking you to let me block the defensive line so you can make the throw. She finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, a deep, tired brown that suddenly looked a little brighter in the morning light. She exhaled a breath that ruffled the loose hair framing her face. Okay, she whispered. Okay, show me how to restructure the orders. By noon, we had a bulletproof document. I printed out a formal stadium vendor agreement, signed in heavy black ink, confirming Daphne's Delights as an official catering partner for the franchise, complete with designated commercial dock access. It was a tangible, ironclad shield against Sylvia's specific accusation. Over the next 2 weeks, our lives settled into a quiet, functional rhythm. The threat of the HOA hearing loomed at the end of the month, but the immediate panic had subsided. Instead of avoiding each other, the logistics of our arrangement forced us into a seamless orbit. On a rainy Tuesday, she was on the field sidelines, dropping off a test batch of protein muffins for the players. I was standing near the dugout, the smell of damp earth and crushed chalk thick in the air. I was working with Clark Alvarez, my assistant coach, and a 20-year-old rookie pitcher who was struggling with his release point. The kid was visibly shaking, frustrated after throwing 4 wild pitches into the dirt. You're muscling it, kid, I said, stepping out of the dugout. I walked out to the mound. The rain was light but steady, cool against my neck. I kept my voice at a low, steady baseline. You're trying to force the velocity with your shoulder because you don't trust your plant foot. My cleat keeps slipping, Mr. Phillips, the rookie muttered, wiping his wet forehead with the back of his glove. Then shorten your stride, I instructed. Demonstrating the motion without a ball, relying on the muscle memory of a career I could no longer physically endure. Balance over power. Trust the mechanics, not the adrenaline. Try it again. Half speed. I watched him adjust, his posture calming under the clear directive. He threw. A perfect strike over the inside corner. I nodded once. Again. Do it 50 times until your body forgets how to do it the wrong way. I walked back toward the dugout and noticed Daphne standing under the awning, holding a thermal box. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. "You're very patient with them," she noted, as I stepped under the shelter, shaking the rain from my jacket. "Panic doesn't fix a bad pitch," I replied, wiping the water from my tablet screen. "It just makes the next one worse." I looked down at the thermal box in her hands. "Are those the new ginger molasses?" "They are," she smiled, handing me the box. "And I brought you a thermos of the dark roast you like. You look like you've been here since dawn." 4 a.m., I admitted, accepting the heavy, warm thermos. I didn't mention that I had been awake reviewing her zoning bylaws, finding every possible loophole Sylvia might try to exploit. I opened my planner to mark down the delivery, and as I did, Daphne's eyes fell on the pages. Her breath hitched slightly. "Max, is that my ingredient order schedule?" I looked down. Written in precise blue ink across my week were her specific deadlines. Order flour. Confirm sugar delivery. Check Daphne's packaging stock. My logistics manager needs to know when the dock is expecting freight, I said smoothly, compartmentalizing the fact that I had written them down myself to ensure nothing slipped through the cracks. It's standard operational procedure. She looked at me. Really looked at me, seeing right through the clinical excuse. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray raindrop off the collar of her coat, but I kept both hands firmly wrapped around the thermos. I wouldn't cross the line. I wouldn't make her feel obligated or pressured while she was relying on my facility. "Thank you," she said softly. It wasn't just for the loading dock. It was for the quiet, invisible net I was trying to build under her. The shift happened on a Friday afternoon. The team had just secured a massive regional broadcasting deal. The front office was buzzing. Kalani Miller, the 22-year-old sports agent who represented our star shortstop, had flown in to finalize the paperwork. She was a hurricane of energy, brilliant and loud. As we walked out of the stadium and into the shared parking lot near my neighborhood I had walked to work that day, she was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is huge, Max," Kalani cheered, clutching the signed folder to her chest. "You literally saved this kid's career with this TV exposure." Before I could respond, Kalani threw her arms around my neck and planted a loud, ecstatic kiss on my cheek. It was entirely platonic, the joyful reflex of a kid who had just secured her first massive commission. I patted her shoulder awkwardly, stepping back with a polite chuckle. "Good work, Kalani. Safe flight back to Chicago." She waved and jogged toward her rental car. I turned to walk down the tree-lined sidewalk toward my house, wiping a smudge of her lip gloss off my cheek with the back of my hand. I didn't think twice about the interaction. By 7 o'clock that evening, my phone began to vibrate violently on the kitchen counter. I was making a grilled cheese sandwich for Maya. I wiped the butter off my fingers and unlocked the screen. It was a text from Clark, my assistant coach. "You might want to check the neighborhood Facebook group, boss. It's getting ugly." I frowned, tapping the notification. The screen loaded, displaying a post from Sylvia Gray. It was a photo. A high-quality, zoomed-in shot taken from down the street, showing Kalani wrapping her arms around my neck and kissing my cheek. From the angle, it looked far more intimate than it was, but it wasn't the photo that sent a cold spike of clarity through my chest. It was the caption. So disappointing to see what passes for moral leadership in our community these days. Some people use their influence to play the field, while others use it to skirt the rules. Makes you wonder what kind of backroom paperwork and procedural favors are being traded to keep certain home bakeries running illegally. The HOA will not tolerate businesses built on manipulation. Formal eviction of commercial activity will be finalized at the town hall on Wednesday. The room went quiet in my head. I capped the butter dish too hard, and the click sounded like a warning against the granite counter. Sylvia wasn't just attacking Daphne's business anymore. She was attacking her character. She was suggesting that Daphne was securing favors to bend the rules, weaponizing the photo of Kalani to paint me as corrupt and Daphne as complicit in a procedural scam. I placed the phone face down. I didn't reply to the post. I refused to engage in a digital screaming match. "Maya," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "eat your sandwich. I have to make a phone call." I walked into my home office and shut the door securely. I called Daphne. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I looked out my window. Her house was 3 doors down. The lights were entirely off. For the next 2 days, Daphne's porch light stayed off. Even the delivery cooler, usually sitting on her front steps, was gone. Neighbors who usually waved at me looked away when I drove past. The silent, suffocating weight of small-town judgment had settled heavily over her home, and she was weathering it alone. On Monday evening, I couldn't wait any longer. I walked up her driveway. The wind was biting, tearing the last dead leaves from the oak trees. I knocked on her door. 3 firm raps. A minute passed. Finally, the door opened a fraction. Daphne stood in the dimly lit hallway. She looked devastated. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual neat hair pulled into a messy, defeated knot. "Max, please," she whispered, keeping the heavy wooden door acting as a shield between us. "You shouldn't be here. Someone will see." "I don't care who sees," I said, my voice steady, though my chest tightened at the sight of her pain. "Are you all right?" "No," she said, her voice cracking. "I lost 2 wedding cake contracts today. They saw the post. They said they didn't want the drama associated with their events. Sylvia is telling everyone that my business is a front, that I'm manipulating you to bypass the zoning board. It's ruined, Max. 10 years of reputation, and she burned it down with 1 post." She stepped back, trying to close the door. "I have to cancel the stadium contract. I can't let my mess drag your team down. I'm sorry." I caught the edge of the door with my palm. I didn't push it open, but I didn't let her close it either. "Daphne, look at me." She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. "Please, Max, just let me handle the fallout alone. It's safer." "Safer for who?" I asked gently. "You're retreating because you think you have to protect me. You don't." Sylvia manufactured a lie because she realized she was losing her leverage. I stepped back, removing my hand from the door, giving her total autonomy. "I'm not going to let you cancel the contract. You are the best vendor we have. But more importantly, I'm not going to let her bully you into the dark." She opened her eyes, looking at me through the narrow gap. "Wednesday night," I said. "The town hall hearing. Be there. She'll publicly humiliate me," Daphne whispered, fear lacing her tone. "She will try," I corrected. "I will be there. We present the facts. And we end this. Don't let her take your voice." I turned and walked away down the driveway, leaving the choice entirely in her hands. I wouldn't drag her to the meeting. She had to want to fight. Wednesday night, the community center was packed. The metal folding chairs scraped loudly against the linoleum floor as residents piled in. The air was stifling, thick with damp wool coats and the nervous energy of 30 neighbors eager for a spectacle. Sylvia sat at the front table, a microphone positioned perfectly in front of her, a stack of disciplinary files stacked neatly by her manicured hands. I sat in the 3rd row, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit I usually reserve for television interviews. I held a thick, leather-bound binder on my lap. I kept my eyes on the double doors at the back of the room. At exactly 7 o'clock, Sylvia tapped the microphone. Feedback squealed through the room. "Let's call this meeting to order. First on the docket, the formal revocation of residential privileges for Daphne Moore's commercial operation. Due to zoning violations," and Sylvia paused, offering a tight, sorrowful look to the crowd, "defamation of our neighborhood standards through inappropriate business practices." The doors at the back of the hall opened. Daphne walked in. She wasn't wearing her flour-dusted jeans. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her shoulders pulled back, her chin held high. She looked terrified, but she didn't stop moving. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. She didn't sit in the back. She walked straight to my row and took the empty seat beside me. She didn't say a word, but the proximity was a statement in itself. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "Miss Moore," Sylvia said, her voice turning sharp, "since you've decided to join us, the board is prepared to hear your defense before we vote on the eviction of your business." Daphne took a slow breath. I felt her hand tremble against the fabric of her skirt. I didn't touch her. I didn't hold her hand. She needed to stand on her own power first. Daphne stood up. The room went dead silent. "My business," Daphne said, her voice shaking slightly before finding its anchor, "operates under a valid Class A cottage food permit. I have never violated a noise ordinance, and I have never exceeded the legal traffic limit for a home residence." She looked directly at Sylvia. "You claim I use inappropriate leverage to bypass rules. That is a lie. I run a clean, honest business, and I refuse to be intimidated out of my home by fabricated gossip." Sylvia scoffed into the microphone. "Fabricated? I think the entire community saw the photographic evidence of the procedural favors you trade with our local team owner. I stood up. I didn't wait for permission to speak. I walked to the front of the room, carrying the leather binder. I didn't look angry. I looked like a man who was about to dismantle an opposing team's defense, piece by clinical piece. I placed the binder on the table directly in front of Sylvia. "This," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without the need for a microphone, "is a signed, notarized affidavit from Kalani Miller. She is a registered sports agent based in Chicago. She represents my starting shortstop. The photograph you posted online, Sylvia, was taken moments after she secured a multi-million-dollar broadcasting contract for her client. The kiss was a celebration of a professional victory. She has also attached a formal notice of intent to sue you for defamation, given that you publicly implied she was selling favors to keep her business running. My attorney drafted this demand letter yesterday. Filing comes next if you ignore it." A collective gasp echoed through the folding chairs. Sylvia went completely pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I opened the binder and pulled out a stack of stapled documents, handing them to the board secretary sitting next to Sylvia. "Furthermore," I continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room, "you claimed Daphne's ingredient deliveries violate the industrial freight weight limits. Included in this packet are the certified weigh station logs for every delivery vehicle that has serviced Daphne's address in the last 2 years. Not a single one exceeds 14,000 pounds. The legal limit is 26. There is no violation." I turned to face the crowd. Daphne Moore is the newest official catering vendor for our franchise. She won that contract because her margins are flawless, her logistics are impeccable, and her product is superior. She doesn't need leverage. She has talent. She rerouted her bulk deliveries to my commercial loading dock not because she was hiding anything, but because it is a smart, tactical business decision that saves her 14% in overhead. I looked back at Sylvia. The woman was staring at the legal threat from the sports agent, her hands physically shaking. "You attempted to weaponize a lie to destroy a woman's livelihood because you felt ignored," I said quietly, the words dropping like stones in the silent room. "You have no legal standing, no factual evidence, and as of tonight, no credibility." I closed the binder with a sharp, definitive snap. "The board will withdraw the citation and issue a public retraction on the community page by tomorrow morning. If you don't, the injunction gets filed." I walked back down the aisle and stopped beside Daphne's row. "We're done here," I told her quietly. Daphne looked at the frozen faces of the board, then up at me. A brilliant, undeniable relief washed over her features. She picked up her purse, stepped out of the row, and walked beside me toward the exit. The cold night air hit us as we stepped out of the community center. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the damp pavement. We walked in silence for a full block, the adrenaline slowly bleeding out of the moment. "You had an affidavit drawn up," Daphne finally said, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Kalani was furious when I showed her the post," I replied smoothly. "Sports agents don't take kindly to being used in fake scandals." Daphne stopped walking. Under the glow of the street lamp, her shoulders finally dropped. The tight line in her jaw eased, and my next breath came out slower than it went in. The fear and exhaustion that had clung to her for weeks were entirely gone. She looked grounded. "You protected me," she said, the words simple and absolute. "You protected yourself," I corrected gently. "You stood up in that room and looked her in the eye." "I just brought the paperwork." She shook her head, taking a step closer. The distance between us evaporated. "You built a net for me, Max. Even when I tried to push you away, you didn't leave." "I told you," I said, my voice dropping lower, my hands remaining securely at my sides, fighting the intense urge to pull her against me. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore. I've got you." Daphne reached out. Her hand was warm as she rested it flat against the center of my chest, right over my heart. It wasn't a demanding touch. It was a claiming one, a public choice, right here on the sidewalk where anyone could see. "I know," she smiled. "And I'm not pushing you away anymore. We're keeping the stadium contract. And maybe we can add a dinner to the schedule. Just you, me, and Maya." I looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes, seeing the quiet, unshakable trust shining there. I opened my planner the next morning in my office. The vendor contract stayed on my desk. I flipped to the weekend page. Saturday. Dinner. 3 seats. No more hiding. By noon, The public retraction was posted on the community board, and Daphne's cottage permit was reaffirmed. The neighborhood was quiet again, but this time, it was a peaceful quiet. I learned that winning the wrong way is actually losing. True victory is waking up with a clear conscience. Real love isn't about drama or games. It's about consistency, protecting each other's peace, and showing up when things get hard. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.